because I think it's heartbreaking, the idea that like somebody was born and that was the moment that their parents' lives stopped being cool.
Hello, hello, and welcome to Read, Learn, Live, your book club discussion times 10. I'm your acclaimed host, John Monaster, and I'd like you to join me as I take a deep dive into the world of literature. Welcome to episode 1, where I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with author Nate Waggoner. Nate is the author of Dilettantes and Heartless Manipulators, a novel from Snow Goose Press. He is the co-editor of the-tusk.com, on which he and his ex-girlfriend co-host the Invitation to Love podcast. He co-hosts the funny, sexy, sad reading series in Brooklyn, and he's written for the Shipwreck erotic fan fiction contest and elsewhere. All right, so I'm here with Nate, my amazing roommate. Nate, say hello.
Hey, what did I feel like I brushed up against the mic and then it made the lights change colors or something.
That's exciting, but don't worry about it.
Okay.
This is all part of the plan. It's going to get psychedelic in just a second. So Nate's joining me, and this is going to be all sorts of fun. I'm so excited to have him here. He is not only my roommate, he is an accomplished author, and I've got his book right here in my left hand, Dilettantes and Heartless Manipulators. First off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the writing process, because that I'm always fascinated by. I like to write, but I'm not great at it. I don't do it a lot. So I feel like now that you've got a whole novel, like that's a big deal. So I wanted to ask, why did you even decide to do this? Like, what started you on this journey of like a lot of work?
Yeah, well, I've been writing a long time, and I went to San Francisco State for my MFA, and which is like you're working towards a thesis. I was just kind of working on a few different ideas and different like voices and characters and stuff. And I think my idea early on was just to do short stories. I have my friend kind of like bullied me like at a Christmas party like early like in after my first semester. My friend was like, dude, like you're in a fucking MFA program, like you have a chance to write a novel, like that's like the coolest shit, like you can write a novel, like why the fuck aren't you doing that? So I was like, yeah, he's totally right. Like it's like that is the opportunity, kind of like, not to like hate on anybody who does like great short story collections, and things that are like kind of in between the two have definitely come out of MFA programs, but I was like, yeah, I've got to take advantage of that and sort of tie these things. I started seeing that the things that I was writing about were tied together, and that that it was the same world, and the more like ways that I saw for it to be connected, the more fun I was having with it, I guess.
So it sounds sort of like you were writing almost disparate or different things, and you realized that they could be brought together into the same world. So
yeah,
were you writing short stories with these characters in different places, or how did that work?
Pretty much, and I think anyone who reads it will probably see that early on in it, like this is something that a reader could deduce for themselves probably, but like early on, the earlier chapters are more come from me fucking around and exploring like what who these characters are, and what what's up with them and their lives, and what they're up to, and it's more directionless, I guess. And then increasingly it was a 3-year program, and like I think there was kind of like a dead period at one point where I was doing some other classes, and then I like over time, like I figured out like, okay, this is like, these are the things that have to happen or whatever. So then I saw where it was going, and sort of it started to give it direction.
While you were writing the book, what was your process? Were you writing every day? Were you kind of just taking things, bringing them together that you had written in the past? How did you set about actually doing it once you decided you were going to do it?
It depends. There's a part very early on where Jimmy is talking about how he used to be married and everything, like, and it's just kind of like a monologue, and that came before school started. That was like, I wrote that pretty early. And then I would have a class that I had early on was a character development focused thing, and so and that was there were like a lot of little prompts and stuff, and so I was kind of I had like deadlines, which is like to me is the best thing, is where somebody actually will get mad at you if you don't produce something. That's like the most effective thing for me. And so it was a lot of like walking around and thinking of details and like remembering stuff from real life and trying to figure out ways to pull things together into like cohesive characters and narratives. So it was a lot of individual, it came about from a lot of individual assignments or essays that or in, short fiction pieces that I would turn in. Um, and then later it became I'm just working on this novel more like, and then there was like a longer like editing rewrite process after that,
Yeah.
which was like I get yeah so I guess I don't know, it's um I didn't really have much of a schedule. It's more of like a just like whenever I can get this down, because I've been thinking about it all day, which is like probably not good for your brain. Like it probably drove me a little crazy. But that's how it was.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes you got to go with a system that works for you, right? I mean, in the
Oh,
end,
totally.
everyone on the internet is going to tell you a million different suggestions for how to be productive or how to beat procrastination or whatever,
Yeah.
but you got to find what works for you. So that makes a lot of sense because that worked for you and you
Yeah,
got
and
it done.
I think that's like the importance of deadlines, is that they give you no choice but to find what works for you, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. Maybe tell me a bit about a time something you wrote surprised you, or somehow something took like a surprising turn that even you weren't thinking about just as you were writing or as you were flowing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I think a lot of it through before I actually start typing out, but then
Mm.
like in the forming of like sentences and of actually writing it on the page, there's you find a lot of like ways to push things in funnier directions typically, or but I also think like over the course of writing a novel, like you definitely um I think there's a big struggle between trying to like impart the knowledge that you have as a person, and like be discovering it as you go in a way. And like so I think like almost like the whole second half was like something that I discovered about the characters like later, you know what I mean? And I had like some of my favorite stuff in literature or movies or anything like takes you, it was say sympathizing with the character, and then later it's like, oh, it drops a surprise on you for why they kind of suck as a person, and then but then it was like there all along. And I think that's like there's planning there, but also that's like the author like discovered that at some point, like they spontaneously realized like
That makes sense. Or maybe even sometimes the reverse might be true. Like you might see them first as evil, and
mhm.
then later on you find out, oh, there's actually some good in them.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and
I was,
I
of course, thinking of Darth Vader when I came
totally
up with that example.
right. And that's just the best to me. And so like, and so I mean, I think the more you write and the more you kind of like force yourself to see something through to like a conclusion that's interesting, then the hopefully the closer you'll come to finding moments like that where it's like, oh, I can surprise the reader with a with a character's complexity.
Yeah, those surprises are really great. I think that's what keeps readers hooked
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, because
Yeah.
if everything kind of proceeded along in a very normal and obvious fashion, people would be like, well, I already figured it out. Who cares? You know,
Right. Yeah.
that's cool. So when you think about maybe new writers and maybe even thinking about how you were when you first started writing, can you compare sort of what you know now versus what a lot of people when they're starting know, and kind of the difference between that? Like what does everyone think is like the right way to do it, but it turns out to be wrong? You know, that kind of a thought.
I think it has a lot to do with what we were just talking about, actually, because I think it's I think that writers maybe start out thinking that they know all about life and like how, but then it's like I started writing this book when I was like 24, and like of course I didn't know, and I don't really know that much now. But like and I think the more you find yourself being like vulnerable and like open to stuff and like listening, then and the less you're being like didactic or condescending to the reader with like your knowledge or whatever, then like that's I think it's almost like you learn that you don't know anything. You learn
Yeah,
like, you know.
that's self-discovery.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's great. So it almost sounds therapeutic to me, because you're really discovering that you don't have all the answers, and there's a lot out there, and maybe you're kind of channeling that into some of the characters.
Yeah, I can see that. I think therapeutic is broad, and
Yeah.
it's I would say it's like um I would tell a younger writer than myself to avoid pure catharsis, like
Right.
in actually try like in an actual work of writing that they're trying to put out in the world, because nobody likes it when you're like just like, I'm so mad at my dad, and you know what I mean, like that's there's no but then maybe you can come from the perspective of uh like the person who's experiencing those emotions, once you find like the other dimension that's kind of like what am I trying to say, like if you're the person who says I'm so mad at my dad and that's like the thesis of the work, but it doesn't go anywhere further than that, then that's like that sucks and is like uncomfortable to try and force anybody to read ever. But if you're like working through the character of that person and seeing them from like a more detached perspective, then that's like gonna be more fun to read.
Makes a lot of sense. That's some wise words of wisdom right there.
Was it? I think that
I
might
think
have
so.
been a.
I think so. We'll look at the tapes later and
Yeah.
decide, but I like it. So I want to kind of get into some of the questions I had specifically about the book itself, because it was just a really interesting book. But first, I thought it would be helpful for everyone to hear kind of from your in your own words, like what is the book about? What's the kind of elevator pitch summary of what the book is?
It's about a love triangle and an escape from a cult and an aspiring rapper.
Nice. I like the succinctness of that.
They actually like made us do that when we were like putting our thesis together, which is like so good, because normally it's like, well, I don't know, like you don't really want to like put an elevator pitch together because it sounds fucking whack. But like then I like wrote it and I was like, oh yeah, I like that. I like that. That's what it's about.
Yeah. Wait, that helps.
Yeah.
So, I mean, did you hear any others that were just like a mess? I mean,
I think there's like an art to tying anything together thematically, or you know, especially if things. I don't know if I can think of one that's like an actual like novel plot summary like I just gave that I heard.
mm-hmm.
And I think I think if it's more disparate pieces, then you can say that these touch on themes of like childhood and you can list a bunch of themes and say that it creates like a whatever with a I don't know. I feel like I've been out of grad school not that long, but then it's like so much of it just decays in my mind.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast we forget things. I mean, I read a lot of books, and with a lot of the books I read, I can only think of a couple lessons maybe I've gleaned from them or something like
Sure.
that. And I wonder, like, I'll read a 500-page book, and then 6 months later, I couldn't tell you most of what happened, what was in the pages. It's just, so yeah, that's always
I think, but isn't everybody kind of like that? And then it's like these certain moments that pop back at you or something.
Right. So it comes back at you in a weird way.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. One of the things I noticed was that your book is full of awesome lists. You really use lists in a lot of different ways. Yeah, it's great. So you've got a whole chapter of fan fiction titles. You love using lists in kind of paragraphs where you just have commas of just like items after items after items. I mean, and everybody kind of, lists are a huge thing now. Online, obviously, everyone gets the top 5 reasons to do X or whatever. I mean, what is the deal with lists? Why are they so great? Why did you use them so much?
This is a great question. Also, all these questions are great. I want to say right here on this podcast that these questions are so good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. You're killing it with the book specific questions. Lists. And I thought a lot about this one. Lists are, I think, there's something that creates like juxtapositions at, like, like you'll list one thing and then the next thing will be a juxtaposition to that, like automatically just in your head, or like three things that are similar and then the fourth is a juxtaposition. And I think that's like almost automatically pleasing to people. And that's fun. And I um I'm a big fan of like Thomas Pynchon and David Foster Wallace, and that's one thing that influenced me, like in college, was just that they would write these like pages and pages long paragraphs with like these with just details of like something that's in a room, just all the things that are in like a messy room or something. And that just like amuses me so much. And it's so rich, like it gives such a richness to whatever scene almost to excess, like, because a lot of the time we're taught to be economical, and so sometimes to see an author intentionally flaunt that is really funny to me. And because it's almost like you're in on the joke. It's like, look, I know it's, you know what I mean, like I know I'm not supposed to do this or something, which is just, it gives me such a kick, like as a reader. And it's also, yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned like yeah, like listicles and stuff, which weren't like fully as like as ubiquitous, I think, when I started, right, or when I, and certainly not when I developed the style. But it's like, it is like a very like contemporary thing of like just a fragmentation of like, here's this and here's this and here, like nothing is coherent. I don't know, that's like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
No,
And that's like, yeah, there's like a bleak like humor in it, just almost in that inherently or something. I don't know.
no, and I really like what you said about it being flaunting the rules, in the sense that we're told to be economical, but if you, these lists that just go on forever, it's just like, it just drags and people are just like, what's going on? I think it's one of those things where you always hear you have to know the rules and then you can break them.
Yeah,
And breaking the rules is so powerful if you do it right. And
yeah,
that's the trick, you know.
yeah,
You don't want to do it wrong because then it'll just piss people off or be annoying. Like the rules are there for a reason,
yeah.
presumably.
I think I definitely pissed some people off that read fragments of it just for on the grounds that I was breaking the rules, like in school and stuff like that. And because I probably was just breaking the, like I knew them as well as anybody, but I was just like trying to have fun and be a little devil with stuff
Yeah.
sometimes. And I think it does like drive people nuts sometimes.
I mean, so was the feedback that you got that this is driving me nuts or this is bad or whatever, did that just fuel you to keep doing it more?
Sometimes,
Basically?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Or I think, I don't know, I think it fueled me to because I would get an equal amount of positive feedback, and it would be like, okay, those are my people, and they get what I'm doing, and I think it fueled me to like play, like know who I'm who this is for. And it gave me direction in a way, I think.
Wow, that's good. It's good to have direction. And I think it's interesting, especially that you got feedback and incorporated it as you were writing.
Yeah,
So you weren't just writing in a vacuum and then you had the whole thing and then you shipped it off to an editor or something. Like
totally.
you were getting
Yeah.
feedback as you were going. And I think that can be a double-edged sword. I know that sometimes that can, send you in these weird spirals. Like, wait, should I be listening to these people instead of writing what I want? I mean, I
what
remember,
if Kevin doesn't like it?
Yeah, I know. Jeez. Well, I just flashing back. I don't know if you've seen that episode of Home Movies. I think where they were having the comment cards and like they were just like, there's, everyone just is commenting negatively on everything they do. And they were just like, I don't know what we're doing anymore. And at the end they realized like they're not making movies for other people. They're just making them for themselves.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's very real.
Yeah. So the other thing, I have many things I was thinking about, but I really enjoyed the way that you wrote sort of the narration, and it really keeps you on your toes, and it's very self-reflexive, and it's talking at the reader, and it's asking whether or not the cocaine was laced with laundry detergent, and mentioning the reader by name and breaking down these walls, and so that's obviously a very conscious choice you made while writing. And so I was curious why you did that and why you wanted to really make it so apparent to the reader that they were reading a book.
Yeah, I think it's in part, as with like a lot of this stuff, it's like in part an homage to other stuff I like, and just like trying to amuse myself as I'm writing and amuse like the reader and like break down some rules, break down, break the rules and be fun with it on the one hand. But I also think, um, I think there is also like a craft based reason for that, which would be like, and I think like George Saunders would be an example of somebody who does this like incredibly well. Would just to be, I think like the narrator in any given segment of that book is very close to whatever character they're describing, and I think to um, I, I I think to almost get when what because when something's happening in the book that is in the grand scheme of things not that big of a deal, but it's huge to that character in that moment, and it's there's they're feeling a lot of tension, and like it's this big moment in their lives, maybe like Caroline at the bar with that creep that she works with, and she's trying to decide if she's going to have an affair, and so that's like big for her, and it's um I kind of like the idea of like the narrator being so like almost to excess like on her side and trying to figure out like, or just so close to her that it's um like tugging on your shirt almost with it. And I think that's like, I guess that would be another example of just like it's entertaining to me when I see it happen. And I think there's just like an irony to it where it's like we all know this is not the literal end of the world, this is just like a big deal, and there's something like, that it kind of presents both sides in that way. Like you think both things in your head when you see that kind of like overly dramatic, overly close kind of thing where it's like reader, aren't you seeing that this is happening? Like it's yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost like the narration is bridging the gap. It's
Yeah.
kind of like making sure that the reader understands what's happening, but also highlighting the drama and kind of kicking it up to another level.
Yeah, because hopefully I'm with the reader. Like hopefully I know where the reader's at. Hopefully I already know what that the reader knows what the implications of that scene are, but they will still enjoy the irony of talking about it in such an overdrawn way at times, because you're right inside of Caroline's head, and like yeah, like I wouldn't expect you to be reading this as though she's literally like your friend or your mother or something, but but I like the idea of like honoring how worked up she is.
Yeah. So I also want to talk about time, because this book takes place all over the place time wise.
Yeah.
And jumps back and forth with abandon, and is just very happy to take the reader back and forth. And so I'm just curious why you decided to do that, and what are some of the pros and cons that you were thinking through when you made those decisions.
A lot of it came from wanting to sort of tell the story of like a community at large in general, like just like a few people who kind of know each other, and then focus in on their individual characters and perspectives for different segments of it. And I thought that I would introduce a character and then become interested in them, and sort of like fragments and moments from their life where you see like you have Ellis in the car being like the first time you see Ellis, he's driving around and he's very much like a kind of typical like uh ex hippie dad who's very self righteous, and um isn't really, he's just kind of giving a monologue and not really listening to anybody around or caring what they're talking about. And so I wanted to see like the best moment in his life and what was the moment where everything turned and changed. And because I think it's heartbreaking, the idea that like somebody was born and that was the moment that their parents' lives stopped being cool. And I think maybe millennials are handed that narrative like subtly and not so subtly a lot of the time. And I don't think I initially like thought of doing it that way, but then I became interested in it, and I became um like I figured out it had to be 1985 because it's 2012. So it had to be 1985 when they like got together. And so I had a lot of fun like reading and thinking about 1985, you know.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, such a different era.
It's weird.
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, and the things that I think like one thing that I really enjoy doing um is is just finding things and and references and ephemera, and setting something in a specific year helps that, where you can say like I know I reference there's a DC Comics thing that happened, the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I mentioned that, and I talk about a bunch of bands and stuff, and I felt like I managed to do it in a thematic way, and uh in it where the imagery cohered to the 2012 stuff, and you've got Friday the 13th movies and things like that. Like that's very specific imagery that matches up.
No, that's great. It reminded me of, I don't know if you've read Ready Player One. It's kind of this.
I've never read it. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just the book is one big homage to the '80s. You know, this kid
Yeah.
has to play all these games and get really good at all these '80s video games, essentially. And so it has all those intricate details about all these different video games, where the guy clearly just researched an insane amount to
Yeah.
get all of those
That's so
particular
awesome.
things in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's exactly what you're talking about. Is what makes it so interesting, is that we can really identify, and especially for people that were around then, that can then also really even be reminded of that. It's like
Yeah.
an extra plus for them because they get to take a journey down memory lane.
Yeah, those are the people that were mad at me in workshop.
Oh, really?
Because how dare I?
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Well, how dare you bring up their
Exactly.
favorite
What do I
year
know?
or whatever?
Yeah.
You weren't even there.
Yeah.
That's really good. So you also use a lot of interesting tropes, and you did something where you would always take things to the extreme to make a point. You essentially, like when for instance, when Jimmy was being interviewed for his job, I think this was at the school, elementary school maybe. Each interviewer would ask like a regular question, like, "What's your biggest weakness?" And then Jimmy would have like a crazy internal dialogue about everything he's ever done wrong, and the whole problems with his mom, and it was just like a huge disaster for him.
Yeah.
And you do this a lot, where you just jammed home like how crazy things were by going to the extremes in any given situation. So, why did you decide to do that, and what makes that so successful?
Because these are very, I think like very normal like middle class lives that I'm describing in a lot of ways. But then I'm also with both Jimmy and Phil. I think I'm also speaking to maybe my experience as a person with anxiety and a person who just makes mountains out of molehills, and I think and I think it's good. It's just good material to take to make a mountain out of a molehill. Sometimes it's just to take something that everyone knows sucks, like a job interview, or I don't know, where it and to just complete the thought so much further than it could ever go, like that than it should be going. And if you're just going to be a professional about it, then you just like have these answers to these questions, and then you just move on. And I like the idea of having a character who's almost a savage in the midst of like normal suburban life, and who can't handle these things. And because I what I hope is that it speaks to people somewhat, because everyone kind of feels it on some level, and they don't want to admit it to themselves, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it It actually reminded me a bit of White Noise. Have you read
I
White
love
Noise?
White Noise. Yeah,
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 yeah. So it's great because it satirizes the suburban
yeah,
life so extensively.
yeah.
And that's what I think that's what this taking things to the extreme, and I think that's what satire is a lot of the time.
Yeah, yeah, and White Noise is like uh there's such a preoccupation with death and disasters, and it's almost like those characters are yearning or it definitely is like they're just like they crave this connection with the visceral. And yeah, so I think that that definitely spoke to me and influenced me, because it's yeah, the more vanilla you try to make things, the more it's gonna come roaring back the opposite direction.
Yeah, for sure. So Jimmy gets the job and then walks out on it to buy a ticket to Jamaica to record rap music. So this is obviously everyone wants to do this,
Yeah.
but most people don't do it. What do you think made Jimmy really do it? And then the follow up is this obviously all goes horribly wrong for him
Yeah.
because then everything falls apart in Jamaica,
Yeah.
and he gets arrested, and it's just all this ridiculousness happens. So I feel like you simultaneously let the reader kind of bask in the enjoyment of, oh, he gets to do something I've always wanted to do. This is great, good for him. And then it just comes back to bite him like crazy, and then the reader is just like, that's right, that's why I don't do that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, was that kind of the setup? Was that the
I
reason,
hope
or why
so.
did you do
I hope
that?
I think so, but I also hope that the reader is very disappointed in Jimmy for walking out on that job. That his girlfriend walks. That is he's dating the girl that he's working with, and he leaves her too, which is terrible. And but I think he does it because he never got a chance to like even try for his dream really, and he never. I mean, partly on his own. That's his own fault. He never did it in the first place, but also that he it's you you he never did anything big or adventurous in his life except just fuck around and be mischievous and antagonize people, and it was like a yearning that he had all this time to maybe make something real and constructive of it. And I think there is like a beauty to that yearning, as definitely. And like he does almost make it, and like I think like the stuff that he records, I think that I wrote that to be like, I would love to hear that, like that to me is like, that sounds great. Um and because I do think that he has like this talent and this ability, but he mismanages the opportunities that come to him, and the lack of opportunities that come to him. The lack of opportunities make him depressed, and then the opportunities make him too impulsive and make bad decisions. Um, and so I guess I wanted to see like what would happen when he gets what he needs, and then what would happen when he gets what he wants, and then and then he does have something that's pure bad luck happen to him. Pure unlikely bad luck happens to him in a way. What I hope is that the reader will kind of like feel a thrill in seeing him uh, get owned in such a specific way, where he's like, insulted personally, as well as like things go wrong for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea that of people taking that pleasure in when things go wrong, that Schadenfreude idea is very big there, and I think that things are constantly going wrong for him. I mean, and then at the end, after the whole trip, he has to like beg to his mom to like, you get out of there. Like, it's just everything is bad. But yeah, I think people would kind of enjoy that to some extent because it's then validates their inaction in their lives, like I was saying.
Yeah. But I that's another time where it's maybe just a subconscious metaphor for me going to grad school and feeling like I've fucked up my life or something, because I did have like a pretty good job like at a school, and then I was like, oh no, I got into grad school, like I'm out of here, I'm moving to California, like and so there's this feeling of doing something impulsive and maybe just very costly in the name of like the dream or whatever. That it's I want to see it glorified, but also like dragged down at the same time.
Yeah, fair enough. So near the end of the book, Dennis, who was the former cult leader,
Yeah,
comes to Ellis's door to sell Ellis magazines, and Ellis, again, Schadenfreude, is just reveling in what how far Dennis has fallen. But then Dennis ends up robbing Ellis,
yeah.
right? And it just everything goes wrong. I mean, why did that have to happen? And why was it important that he reveled and then got screwed, almost
Yeah.
like Jimmy's get positive and then negative again? Is this just that cycle that keeps happening that you wanted to really imprint on people?
Maybe, yeah. I think it's like in miniature, like a version of Jimmy's whole story. It's like because Ellis, we'd seen so much of his life up to that point, and we know that like he deserves to have that moment of glory where he tells off the guy, who tried to imprison his family and who sexually harassed him and who's just a creep all around, and that guy has fallen. And so Ellis has this moment, and then, but then he just gets hit in the head, and I maybe he had that coming to him too, or he just was he. I think if you revel in that moment of glory too much, then you lose your guard,
Yeah,
and he'd wanted it all his life. Everybody wants to have that moment where you're so right, and the person that everything that has ever gone wrong in your life, it's like the one cause of that is like standing before you. It's too good to be true.
and it was.
Yeah.
No, so that beautifully segues into what I want to talk about next, which is like what are some lessons you think are maybe imparted in the book? And I think like that's a clear one right there
Sure.
that you just mentioned.
Don't let your guard down.
Don't let your guard down ever.
Always, yeah. Maybe, yeah, because I wouldn't want to be too didactic. All the messages really is that this is how life is sometimes, and if this is what you're going through, be careful, but also, we get it. Everyone gets it. That's how it is. And like I think in part it's like stuff that I wish that I had known about when I was younger or something. And yeah, so it's like beware of cults, but don't be too much of a lone wolf. And then I think hopefully like it comes down to an idea that like um that friendship is good, art is good, and even if you have to struggle for it as like to a ludicrous degree, maybe there's like some disaster looming and we're all gonna die, but it's still it's ultimately it's okay. It's all just kind of it's all just it's all funny and like ridiculous, like every and we can laugh about it retroactively, even as horrible and like tense and scary as things can feel sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, I think that last part is absolutely key, is that you have to be able to laugh a little bit,
Yeah.
even at the craziest and most upsetting things. And
Yeah.
to me, that's definitely helped me a lot with get through things.
Sure.
And so I think that's a great message to take away. So one of the things I asked you to do was to pick another book.
Yeah.
And I asked you to pick another book that can maybe help contextualize what you wrote or a discussion in relation to
Sure.
your book. So tell me about the other book and what its deal is.
So I said, my book's like date to the ball is The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze by William Saroyan, which so I was in a workshop with Peter Orner, who is a San Francisco State professor, and he his book Love and Shame and Love is an excellent one that I would recommend as well, and also fragmented and with humor and like found like historical things, and um and he recommended this book to me And he was like, it's one of those things that's kind of like over the past like few decades of literary history has kind of fallen by the wayside, but like it used to be some people's Catcher in the Rye. Like if that, like it was like Beatles versus Stones, like Catcher in the Rye versus Daring Young Man and the Flying Trapeze, and that and that book consists of short stories, many of which are monologues from the same character or a similar character, um, who is relentlessly a loser and a slacker, and he believes in it. Like he's constantly justifying things to himself, and he's broke all the time, and I think it's a very, like, for a writer, I think it's very liberating to read because it doesn't a lot of short stories just present a scenario, and then there's like something happens and it makes you think or whatever, and it almost aggressively doesn't do that. It seems like it's so aggressively into this one dude's perspective, which it can't be because life can't go on in that same direction all the time. um but that's like the almost the fun of it, is the finding the nuances of how this guy is. I mean, like the character in the first one dies, um, and but then it just goes on with these same stories where the it's a very similar character, just increasingly um, so averse to change, so averse to making something of himself, so actively, much like Holden, actively negative about everything around him, and it's a delight.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
That's the best pitch I've ever heard for a book besides yours. So
Thank
I will
you.
definitely go check
Yeah,
that one
more
out.
people should read it nowadays. I
It
think.
sounds good because I mean it's one of, like everyone's read Catcher in the Rye, or at least
Yeah,
you've been
yeah,
assigned to read it by your high school English teacher,
yeah,
even if you didn't. So it's interesting that somehow the other book it got dropped at some point.
yeah,
I wonder how that happened.
yeah.
Poor marketing.
Right.
But I do like date to the ball, by the way. So I'm going to steal that phrase
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
that. That's a great
Yeah.
way of putting it. Okay, so I wanted to ask you just some quick little random questions. The thunder round because I'm different, and then we'll wrap it all up. Sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. So, what are you reading through the back of this?
I
What
don't know.
are you
I
trying to
was
get the
entranced.
questions?
Yeah.
Nice. So, what's one of your favorite places you've ever been?
New Orleans.
So why is that?
It's very. It's like a. I mean, I've only been there for like one night, and me and my girlfriend are going back next month for like a long weekend, and it's like. So it sounds. I'm gonna sound like I'm like exoticizing something that I don't know about, but it's like there's a mysteriousness to it, and it's like a very different culture. It's extremely rich in terms of there's music everywhere, there's food everywhere. I like posted on Facebook like, what should I do in New Orleans, and like everybody had a fucking suggestion that was different. Like I think like over the like if you read through all my Facebook comments, every single place in New Orleans got recommended. it's just 100 across the
Yeah,
board.
it's just all great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I've been to New Orleans. I think, yeah, you're right. It's very different, and
Yeah.
that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
I love that you came up with that also based on just spending like a day there. Like
Yeah.
that's awesome when
Yeah.
when a place hits you like that. It's like
Totally.
love at first sight.
Yeah.
So beyond that, what's beyond going back to New Orleans? What's something on your bucket list that you haven't gotten to yet, or what's something you really want to do?
I was gonna say have a hit book.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Which you will,
Thank you.
thanks to this podcast. Call it the Monaster Bump. So recommend a book besides the one we've discussed so far. So we've talked actually about a lot of books, but
Yeah.
just throw something crazy out there. I really like the idea of one maybe people haven't heard of, or maybe one people have heard of.
I was gonna say Monster Party by Lizzie Acker and King Wizard by Tom Batten.
Whoa.
I'm friends
Okay.
with both of those people, so
Awesome.
it's just a yeah.
Now that's
But they are two of my favorite books, hands down.
that's great because you're both helping them and showing off excellent literature.
Yeah,
I've never heard of either of those books, so
yeah,
I will read.
yeah.
Great. So let's wrap it all up. Most importantly, where can people buy the book? Now they're so excited about it.
Snowgoosepress.com. That's the first
Spell that.
book on Snow Goose
Oh,
Press.
Snow
like,
Goose.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you don't need to spell that. But I didn't. I thought it was something like Snoggus or something crazy.
Uh,
Snowgoosepress.com.
yeah.
Awesome. So what
Which
do you?
is a link to like the Create Space, and so you can also get it on Amazon and iBooks as well.
Okay. Amazon, iBooks, snowgoosepress.com.
Yeah.
Got it. And what else are you doing? What are you up to now?
I'm working on what I'm working on writing right now is some short story. I want to put together a collection of short stories, and I think I have enough. I have a few finished and enough ideas to where I have like a cohesive vision for it vaguely. So I've been working on that, and I'm just kind of slowly like finishing one and trying to send them out and see what I can do with them. And I've been working on some stuff for the stage, some more like storytelling kind of stuff, and I don't fully know what I'm gonna do with those. But if I guess you could follow me on Twitter at Nathaniel Wagg, NathanielWagg, and at Nate Wagner on Instagram. I post that kind of stuff, like updates on that kind of stuff. I'll have a few things, a few surprises, and also
Ooh.
a lot of dumb jokes on there.
It's really the core of social media.
Oh,
surprises
absolutely.
and dumb jokes.
Yes, that's the best. And I post I do cartoons for the Willamette Week, which is the alt weekly in Portland, and I'll post those on there too. Yeah, and that's about it for right now.
And if anyone listening is a local New Yorker, maybe talk about your reading series.
Oh yeah, and then I've got Funny, Sexy, Sad. Me and Amira Pierce host that, and September 15th is the next one at Molasses Books at 8:00. And I don't have it in front of me. Harvey Katz, Magdalena Waz, a few other great people are going to be there. And it's always packed. It's always a great time. It's a charming used bookstore in Bushwick that sells coffees and beers, and I like it a lot. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I can attest. I went to the, I believe, inaugural one, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So definitely check that out if you're in town. All right, well, that's it. Thanks so much, Nate, for being on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for listening to this inaugural episode of Read, Learn, Live. If you liked it, tell a friend or two and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. If you hated it, tell a friend or two and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. And so it goes.